Hi there, and welcome to a very special Insomnia Insight episode. Today, I will share something for the very first time, but it is something that I've been thinking about for many years, at least 2, 3 years, maybe 4 years. And it is how insomnia, in some shape or form, actually can be viewed as a quote unquote neuroimmunological situation. And what I mean by that is that we can look at immunological cases like allergies, food allergies, or seasonal allergies to actually understand how insomnia works. We can also learn how we meet these allergies in a helpful way and apply that to how we can meet insomnia in a very helpful way. So that was just kind of a little overview, but let's get into it. And I hope you will find this very, very interesting and informational and helpful. It's a little different episode because typically I will, you know, showcase some kind of question or conundrum or difficult situation and talk about how we can meet that particular one. But this is more like an overview, a big picture episode where we can gain kind of a deeper understanding of what insomnia is. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, this episode may be a little confusing. So you can still watch it, but then I would say watch some other episodes so you should get more of a sense of what we teach here. But if you've been here for a while, I think this will make a lot of sense right off the bat. But with that said, what do I mean by neuroimmunological? Well, I mean that we can look at how the immune system works and then take a look at how the brain works and see how in some shape or form the brain in some way kind of works the same way as the immune system. That's why I kind of called it neuroimmunological. Now, let's start here. What is our current understanding? And when with our here, I don't mean ours as in like the sleep coach school, but our as in like the world, like, the scientific community in the world, and the idea of allergies stemming from that group, if you will. So what is our current understanding of the rise of seasonal allergies and eczema? So why is it that we have so much more of these type of conditions now than we had, let's say, 50 years ago or 100 years ago? This is known, the hypothesis that we'll discuss here is known as the hygiene hypothesis. And the idea goes, as follows: that our immune system, all those immunoglobulins that are floating around in our body, and like our thymus and, everything else that's involved in the immune system, is a survival system. The immune system is a survival system, and its mission is to detect threats like fungi, like viruses, like bacteria. And when it detects those threats, it attacks them. It attacks these threats and neutralizes them so that we are not harmed. It's a safety machine. It's a survival system, if you will. However, today in the year 2025, we live in a much cleaner world than we did, in the past, millennia, past decades, past centuries. We live in a cleaner world. But our immune system doesn't know that. Our immune system is still actively searching for threats, actively searching for bacteria, viruses, fungi, other things to keep us safe from. Still looking. And as it is doing so, as it's looking out for threats, trying to detect threats, it may mistakenly identify harmless substances as threats, like pollen, for example, misspelled here, which we have to correct immediately. Pollen, like pollen or dust or food, or even like proteins in our own body, can be mistaken as threats and attacked. And when our own body attacks things like pollen, for example, we get the symptoms we have with allergy. We get like secretions. We get like the teary eyes, the itching, the pain. The redness. All of these are symptoms of like an attack going on, where our body is attacking something, but in this case, something that isn't actually a threat. Or eczema is thought that it's attacking some of our like proteins, substances found in our own body that aren't threats, and then we get these eczema symptoms. And I currently have some eczema. This may be why I thought about talking about this at this is the very time. But anyways, this is the idea. This is the idea of how a cleaner environment with an active immune system can lead to these mistakes, these mislabeling of harmless substances as threats, which leads to the symptoms we have of allergies. Now, how do we treat allergies? Well, there's more than one way, but the one I really want to highlight here is not the one where we sort of just dampen the symptoms, but when we get to the root of allergies, when we actually retrain the immune system, where we teach the immune system that these substances aren't actually threats. So to treat allergies, it is possible to desensitize the immunological system by gradually exposing it to what it initially identified as a threat. So with pollen, for example, you can introduce small amounts of pollen to the body and increase that amount of exposure over time. And little by little, the immune system learns that this is actually not a threat. This is a harmless substance, and it doesn't mount an attack. And then we no longer have allergies. We no longer have allergy symptoms. Now, at this point, you may see exactly where this is going, or you may be confused. You may be thinking, I don't understand what this has to do with insomnia. What has this got into insomnia? Well, to explore that, we are actually going to use the very same banners that I used to explain the hygiene hypothesis, but just replace a few words and it will be very clear to you. Our brain, let's start here with the brain. Our brain is just like the immunological system. Our brain is also a survival system. It's a survival system there to detect threats like an enemy tribe, like a warrior from an enemy tribe, be like, in the neighborhood, right? Or a wild dog, or a pack of wild dogs that are out there and may hurt us or our children or something like that. Like our brain is always out there to scan for threats, always, interpreting sounds, noises, all the input in that context to make sure we're safe, right? However, we live in a world that is much safer, actually, than it was 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or many thousands of years ago. We live in a safer world, but our brain is still actively searching for threats, plural for threats. Let's correct that as well. So yeah, it's always searching for threats. And just like the immunological system, our brain can mistake harmless experiences like being awake at night, not falling asleep, like being tired, like feeling anxious as threats and attack them or try to avoid them, uh, treating them as threats. And that leads to us having these symptoms of the inner struggle. And that's when we can have, we always feel really scared. We are trying things to get away from these perceived threats that isn't working. We become really exhausted. We become angry, etc., etc. Now, to leave the inner struggle, we can actually desensitize the brain. And I use the word desensitize here instead of the word we typically use, which is befriending. But it's the same idea, which is it is all, both desensitization or befriending. It is describing a type of like exposure. We can expose our brain to what it has identified as a threat and teach it that this is not a threat. And exposure here means like we can not fight, we can not try to escape, we can not try to avoid when we encounter what the brain has mistakenly identified as a threat. So it's the same idea as with pollen. We can, when we can, with pollen, it's much more deliberate that we can actually inject ourselves with kind of a little piece of little like a little amount of pollen, right? So that's more deliberate. It's not like we can like inject ourselves with a little bit of wakefulness to show the brain that it's safe. But the idea is the same, that we are exposed to what has been identified as a threat without an attempt to escape it or get away from it. And that leads to the brain or the immunological system to see that, oh, this is not a danger. This is not a threat. We don't need to attack this. We don't need to try to avoid it. We can leave this be And then whether it's allergies or whether it is an inner struggle, it fades away, and we have, what we want, which is like, a peaceful situation. Now, this was kind of a conclusion here. I hope this made sense to you. But there was one more thing that kind of popped into my mind as I was preparing to record this episode, and it was, I can hear someone saying like, "Hey Daniel, like you always say that insomnia is not a disorder, it's not an illness, it's not a disease, but now you're talking about like comparing it with allergies, which we typically do look at as diseases. So, what's the deal here? Should we actually think of insomnia as a disorder or disease?" And to me, the answer is absolutely no, not at all. I hope I made it clear that the immunological system is working to keep us safe. The brain is working to keep us safe. And the fact that they can identify things that aren't threats is actually a feature and not a bug. It would be much more dangerous for us humans if the immune system or the brain was like, it didn't have the flexibility, let's say, to identify things that weren't threats as threats, right? It's a helpful thing. If it here and there mistakes something as a threat that wasn't a threat, well, we can learn that it wasn't a threat, right? But if it's kind of like, how should you call it, calibrated in the other direction, that it should absolutely not mistake something that is not a threat as a threat. It can make the mistake that is much more impactful, which is that saying like, "Oh, this is not a threat," when it actually was a threat, right? If the immune system says like, "Oh, this bacteria, no, it's probably not a threat," that can be really harmful, right? Or if our brain says like, "Oh, that bus coming towards us at 90 miles an hour is probably not a threat," that can be really impactful. So the fact that the brain and the immune system is allowed to mistakenly identify something that is not a threat as a threat is a feature, not a bug. So I would say that to me, the truth is that insomnia is not a disease, not a disorder. It's a feature, not a bug type situation. It is a misunderstanding. And perhaps we can view allergies in the same way, not as disorders really, but more as misunderstandings. And I don't mean that in any way to like diminish or to downplay how impactful allergies or eczema can be. We can be incredibly symptomatic from them, but we can still see that that doesn't mean that our bodies are, disordered, but that the immune system is kind of just confused, and it can be taught what is a truly threat and not, in a way that leads to where we all want to be, which is a peaceful place. So let me conclude there. As always, look forward to hearing your comments, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now. Hi there, it's me, Coach Daniel, and I wanted to say thank you to everyone out there who is spreading the word. You know what I've noticed in the last 6 months to 12 months or something like that is when I ask people how they found us, one of the most common answers is somebody told me on Reddit. And every time I hear that, it really warms my heart. It makes me so glad to hear that someone went out of their way to tell a fellow human about the Sleep Coach School. If you're one of those people out there spreading the word, I want to say thank you so, so much. And if you're not, then maybe you'll see an invitation in doing so, or you can simply hit the like button or hit the subscribe button. That alone helps so, so much in getting our teachings out there and helping more and more people in the world. That was all I want to say here. Thanks so much for tuning in, and can't wait to see you again.